what is the feminist movement saying? That men are sinful? Okay. Well, we understand that from the church. We are sinful. We repent for our sins. The antidote isn't to restructure the hierarchy of the family. The antidote is for the man to lead his wife and children to the cross, to return to God.
Hello and welcome to Catholic Unscripted. I'm Katherine Bennett.
And I'm Mark Lambert.
And joining us today is Father Emmanuel Lemelson. You're very welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much, Katherine. Mark, it's really a privilege to join your show. You have a tremendous show. Thank you for having me on.
No problem at all. We have a mutual friend and he was sharing some of your own content with us and saying, you've got to check out Father Emmanuel. And if we bring that up now, your own channel is here. Father Emmanuel Lemelson, and if I'm saying that right, am I saying that right?
You Father? Are indeed, indeed.
And you're an Orthodox priest. I was just asking you before in the green room about Jonathan Pajot, because he's been on our channel a couple of times, and you said coincidentally he's just tweeted something and quoted you just today.
Well, I just tweeted towards him. I was commenting. He put out an episode called "As Christians, We're Not Called to Be Nice," and incidentally, those was a quote from an HBO Max docuseries I was in with Mark Wahlberg, a faithful Catholic, incidentally. And there was something I happened to be telling Mark in the show, in the docuseries. If you watch HBO Max, I'm not sure if you do or not, but that was one of the things I was telling Mark, and he happened to have quoted that just today in a show. So I said, "Oh, great! I didn't realize you were a fan, Jonathan. Glad to see you quoting us."
Brilliant, excellent. Well,
yeah.
Well. One thing, there's so much you cover, and we'll discuss some of that today. But one of the things that you have spoken into the culture about really, really courageously, I think, and with a very strong voice, is on the crisis of masculinity. And I was just watching a short you did recently, and people can see that now.
Don't be fooled. I've seen the video, the cigars, the suits. The caption screams, "America's back." I understand why you like it. You're hungry for strength. You're hungry for a win. But look closer. You aren't looking at power. You're looking at, well, a Hollywood set. I've watched the video of them in the van. It didn't look like a summit of conquerors. You know what it looked like to me? It looked like a bunch of dudes on prom night. It looked like a middle school sleepover with expensive cigars. They want you to see kings, but I see lost boys playing dress up. You want the truth? Ignore the filter. Look at the ledger. 63% of men under 30 are single. 63%. That is not a dating crisis. You know what that is? That's an ontological collapse. It means the holy order of creation has failed. The sacred lineage of husband, father is, well, broken. And these men in this penthouse, they aren't fixing the order. They're weaponizing the chaos. Look closely at the theology of this video. It is a sort of counterfeit trinity. Andrew Tate, he's the counterfeit father. He claims to be the patriarch, the provider, but a true father lays down his life, while Tate puts a price tag on life. He creates no legacy. He protects no one. He monetizes women. He's not a father. He's, well, a pimp. And Nick Fuentes, he's the counterfeit son. He claims to be the savior of the West, but a true savior dies for his people. Fuentes wants to kill for his ego. He wants the crown without the cross. He hates women. He spits on the womb.
A lot of women want to be raped.
Which means he hates the mother of God. He wants a Christianity without a mother. It's an orphan religion. It is basically dead. Clavicular, he's the counterfeit spirit. The true Holy Spirit is the giver of life. He overshadows the Virgin and brought forth God. But this man, he's the anti-spirit. He has optimized himself into infertility.
I am infertile.
He offers you a temple, but there's no sacrament inside. It is a statue of dust. Do you see the tragedy here? The pimp, the orphan, the idol? They offer you a world of so-called high-value men, but in reality, they are men of no value because each one is impotent in his own way. They are like actors on a stage wearing the masks of kings, but underneath, they are really just slaves. They cannot make a woman a mother, and without that sacrifice, she will never crown them a father. They are taking your rightful anger and twisting it. They need you lonely, they need you angry, because a satisfied man with a wife, a child, and an altar does not buy their courses. He's no longer fuel for the machine. So you must decline the offer. Real rebellion isn't a Bugatti. Real rebellion is the crown of marriage. It is raising a son who knows the fear of God. They are building a brand. You are building a bloodline. Do not trade your inheritance for a like. Do not worship the shadow. Take up the cross of fatherhood. The beast rises, but the lamb conquers. Let the dead bury their dead. You have a kingdom to build.
And in it, you say, don't be fooled by Fuentes, Andrew Tate, and then another figure I'd never heard of, Cavicula, who you say weaponize the chaos. And I thought this was really good to speak to that, because there are so many young men out there desperate for leadership. Mark always says we've got a crisis of leadership. And the worry is that this void will be filled by these extreme voices or lopsided voices. Do you want to tell us about that?
Yeah, Katherine, to tell you the truth, I didn't fully grasp the breadth of the problem myself. As a married clergy myself, most of the Orthodox presbyters are married. I'm married. I have 4 children, and my oldest is a son. And I think, like any family person, we look at the culture and we say, this is the world our children will go out into, and we have to try to make a positive impact, if for nothing else than for our children's sake. And when you look at the statistics, the number of young men who are single now, they're not forming relationships with young women. And I'm just myself learning, Katherine, the depth of the problem and the breadth of the problem, that they simply, for whatever reason, don't have a very sound understanding of healthy masculinity, because of Christian masculinity. And I think what's filling the void are these other influencers online, like Andrew Tate and Nick Fuentes and Cavicula. And what we point out in that short clip, it's only a 3-minute clip, if your viewers are inclined to watch it, is they're sort of the antithesis. They're the inversion, really, of the Holy Trinity, is what we point out in that clip. And so if we don't speak out as Christian, especially as Christian men, if we don't say, look, this is not the archetype is Christ, that's what we're called to be like, self-sacrificial love. We have to exalt women in the image of the Theotokos, the God-bearer, the Mother of God, the Virgin Mary. If we start to twist those images and we depart from that, and they've departed greatly from that, young men will feel very lost. I think they will succumb to temptation. And I think that it will lead to all sorts of dark places, as these 3 people are doing. So I was quite offended when I saw what they were saying and doing. And I just had enough and said, that's it, I'm going to say something. And hopefully it's reached the people it needs to reach. But there's a lot of work to be done, because there's just way too many young men who don't have a good role model to look up to, apparently. And so what's filling the void? It's these voices, these misguided voices.
And it's not just men who and it's not just men who suffer. You said a wonderful quote here: these men want the crown without the cross, and this is part of the problem. But women suffer too from a lack of masculinity, authentic masculinity. And you were just saying about a video you've done on 3 women who have sort of had their lives transformed by Christ, and speak to this as well.
Yeah, so that was our most recent episode. We try to put out a podcast every 2 weeks or so, and our podcasts are a little different because they're not really conversational like this podcast in the conventional sense. They're sort of stories we tell, and I do it with my wife. In the Orthodox Church, we say presbytera. It's the feminine of presbyter. So with my presbytera, and we tell a story, really. And in this case, we took these sort of 3 prominent women and told their conversion stories, how they were sort of brought back from where the culture is going and brought back towards orienting their lives towards Christ. And their stories are remarkable. And what we say in that episode, I don't want to ruin it for anyone who's going to watch it, but we believe really that the attack on women is also an attack on men, because if you distort the image for women and you sort of create this blindness from at one point in that episode, we say, what has happened to your sight? What are men looking for exactly? It's just an attack all around. So my own opinion, Katherine and Mark, is that we as men, we are the head of the family. And what does that mean? It really means that we are called to sacrifice for our wives and our children. I would not want to see my wife or my daughters be crucified, but for men, that is our calling. And if we distort the image of woman and womanhood, as we see in the person of the Virgin Mary, Of course, it's also an attack on a man, in my opinion. So the devil doesn't let up. He attacks both images. And I often point out to people, at least in the Orthodox Church, when you enter the church, if you're in the solea, the church is in 3 sections, the narthex, the solea, and the holy altar, the sanctuary. When you're in the solea, you see on the right of the icon screen, because in the Orthodox Church, we always have an icon screen. It used to be this way in the Catholic Church as well. To the right is always Christ, and to the left is the image of the Mother of God. And in the traditional Orthodox countries, the men still sit on the right and the women sit on the left. So you're looking at these images and you see Christ sometimes in his extreme humility. And when you're a woman, you're sitting in front of the icon of the Virgin Mary, the Theotokos, as we say in Greek, and you see her humility, and oftentimes holding the Christ child. And you see this image of complete obedience to God's will. And that's the fullness of womanhood. And so, in that sense, the church teaches us in her wisdom, what the archetype is and what we're aiming for as man or woman. And when that becomes distorted, it's an attack on both.
There's a real difference between like Fuentes and Andrew Tate, though. Like, there are similarities, obviously, but there's like vast differences as well, especially the way they relate to women, aren't they, Father?
I think so.
Like, one is sort of saying use women, and the other one is saying keep away from women, they're scary.
Well, I think they both actually hate women, is my impression. There's a part where Nick Fuentes, we actually show a clip of him in that reel, and he says, women want to be raped. It's just a horrible thing for him to say that. I think Nick Fuentes is perhaps indicative of the culture of complete alienation between the sexes nowadays. I live in Europe a lot of the time, and interestingly enough, like you guys, obviously, I'm not sure about the UK, but where I live, young men and young women, they associate the friendships. The little kids at school hold hands and they walk to the bus. And in America, there's a pronounced alienation. And of course, really the precursor to the fall is an alienation between a man and a woman. And that very quickly leads to fratricide, is sort of the next big sin. So at the core, really, of our sinfulness is the alienation from one another as man and woman. Oddly enough, Tate presents himself as this alpha male, but somebody recently pointed out to me, I hadn't really noticed, but he said, he's actually quite feminine. I thought, that's interesting. You take a closer look and you're like, the guy's walking around with his shirt all the time. He's shaved head to toe. And said, like, in any other generation, you would have said this was an archetype maybe of a gay man, actually. And why is he trying so hard to present himself as the alpha male, the predator, and so forth? So when you're insecure about something, you have to really push that you're good at it. When you're secure in yourself and your identity, you don't have to talk too much about it. So I think they're all synthetic, frankly. I think the personas they've created for themselves are very much so synthetic. And with Nick Fuentes, who knows how far down the rabbit hole you could go. Sometimes I think he is really just a tool for a political movement. I'm not sure how much of what he says he actually believes. But if you look at historically political movements and what's happening in the United States now, very often the young are exploited to push a political narrative. And when you look at these three, you could say, well, maybe who knows what their sources of funding are. They could very well be being funded by entities that have an agenda to normalize these things.
This very much, we've got to this position through this corruption of the true image, haven't we? Like, we've had, but you can look at it and say, most people watching this will be saying, well, obviously there was an oppression of women's rights, and it's that movement, that feminist movement, that's redressed the balance. Perhaps even to the point where that, like, they might be able to discern the fact that we might have gone a little bit too far with that project at the moment. But fundamentally, people would say it's the right thing. Do you think there was somewhere where the feminist project went wrong, and fundamentally it was the right thing to do? Or do you think it's inherently a broken idea? And if it was broken, that's men's fault, isn't it, to some extent, because we failed to do our job properly?
Yeah, Mark, you raised such a good question. And it's really easy, I think, to fall into that reasoning. And I would just say that the only problem with that line of reasoning is that it excludes the teachings of the church. So what is the feminist movement saying? That men are sinful? Okay. Well, we understand that from the church. We are sinful. We repent for our sins. The antidote isn't to restructure the hierarchy of the family. The antidote is for the man to lead his wife and children to the cross, to return to God. So is feminism a reaction to men's sinfulness? Of course. Yeah. Like, that shouldn't be news. You know, I shouldn't speak from too much personal examples, but in my own life, in my own marriage, you know, my wife is extraordinarily patient and loving and kind and extremely feminine. And, you know, when you have a spouse who's like that, you become better. I mean, I'm sure I was hard-headed.
You're totally right, and you've got it exactly right. I'm thinking now of like that film. It's one of my wife's favorite films, My Big Fat Greek Wedding. Have you seen?
Yeah, of course.
The old lady says, you know, the man is the head of the family, but the woman is the neck, and she can turn.
I think
so that interplay, isn't it, of men and women like that.
I think with feminism, what I think is problematic. I think what's always problematic in terms of sin is an increase in pride and a reduction in humility. And I think I speak and write on this often, this issue, that we have lost. I'm with Alice von Hildebrand that feminism is a great masculine victory, because what we don't realize is that the feminine principle is one of reception. It is Our Lady's fiat. It is thy will be done. And we have lost that. We've grasped. Women have grasped, and we're grasping. And it's not so much about, although these things do matter, you know, if we're going to have a longer conversation, which I don't think we can have now, but it's not, is she wearing trousers or a skirt? It's fundamentally about, have women forgotten the value of women per se? Have women forgotten the value of femininity? They have an obligation towards their femininity, whether or not they deny it, whether or not they reject it. That obligation remains. And I think what we see around us is a rejection and a denial and a refusal to accept that there is some ontological reality there. And the result is absolute decimation and death and sterility all around us. Do men play a part? Of course, all people do. Like you say, we're all sinful and following Eden, following the fall. But we have to find somehow to honor women, not as replicas of men.
That's brilliant, and that's exactly what I was talking about. Really, is the fact that, like, what has feminism brought us? It's brought us women trying to be men. You know, so now, you know, women are better at all the men things than men are. And this is what's bred this alienation that you're speaking into there, Father, isn't it? Where, you know, like men, like the boys, if you like, they don't know how to be men anymore, and they're frightened of doing it in lots of ways. So they kind of they're throwing up their hands and saying, well, we'll do something else, play the Xbox.
Watch porn and play video games. Let's be honest. You know, I taught in schools for many a year, and teenage boys are totally disenfranchised, and you got to feel sorry for them. And I'm not saying I don't feel sorry for, you know, I love all my students that I've taught, but young men just feel disenfranchised, and they are excluded from the market. They're excluded from jobs. They're excluded by quotas that have to be fulfilled. They're ridiculed by the media. There are programs in place in schools to pull girls out and encourage them in STEM subjects, to get them into university at the cost of a place of a young man. And you think, what is this about? This equality on the same play, you know, kind of saying girls have to be just like boys, and men are just resorting to sitting at home, being
babies, playing the stereotype that's being sort of impressed.
And we need good men. We need men.
Well, I think you're exactly right, Katherine. And somehow women were manipulated. It's really an attack on women. They think it's a
Mm.
liberation, but it's not. It's an imprisonment, actually, because they were told that if you sit in a cubicle in an office playing with a spreadsheet 8 hours a day, that's better than holding your child in your arms. I mean, you can't compare the two. When you see these women who climb the corporate ladder, I don't mean to judge anybody, or there are plenty of good women in corporate America, but they almost become like drones. They lose what's unique about each. They have a certain, almost like an inflection to the way they speak, the way they dress, the way they act, and they do lose their femininity. And I do hear from men all the time who are going through divorces, and they kind of tell me the same thing, that incredibly important relationship between a man and a woman cannot exist. The communion, if you will, let's just use the theological term, of ecstasy. In Greek, ekstasis means to stand outside of yourself. We did another episode on this, actually, on our podcast. I think it was episode, I don't know, maybe 51 or 52, talking about masculinity. And if there is that role confusion and that hierarchy is lost, and then a woman is suddenly cut off from her husband and her family in her best hours of her day, she's getting on the subway in the morning, she's getting home late at night, and their best energy is going to her coworkers and to her boss, and then you're outsourcing the raising of the children to a stranger. I just fail to see what the family's gaining and what the woman's gaining. And I recently saw this video of this woman. She was holding an infant in her hands, and she was weeping and crying for joy. And I remember my wife when she gave birth to our first, and the tears of joy. A man will never be able to have a child, right? He can never carry a child in his womb. The mother really plays a very important role in the life of the child, whether it's a boy or a girl, that cannot be replicated. To cut a woman off from that and tell her that that's liberation somehow is a devastating trick to play on the psyche, in my opinion.
Funnily enough, I've just written about this on our own website, and I make the point that even women who can't have children still have an obligation to their femininity, are still ontologically woman. And so it's, I think the problem with conversations like this is some women hear it and say, I'm less of a woman because I can't have children. But you are, you may be older, you may be consecrated, you may be infertile, but you are still woman and you are still feminine, and there is still a difference. And what is that difference? That's what we've lost sight of and need to recover, I think.
Yeah,
Sorry.
absolutely. I mean, all you have to do is encounter the holy mothers, the monastics who live a life of holiness. They're not masculine. And it kind of reminds me of the great trilogy by C.S. Lewis. You might be familiar with it, Out of the Silent Planet and Paralandra, and that hideous strength. But in the book Paralandra, it kind of encounters ultimately, the epitome of feminine and masculine, and the sort of the attack on the feminine. Lewis was almost prophetic in that way in his work at Paralandra. It's just, he was really decades ahead of his time, really almost a century ahead of his time, and where we're going today.
That's kind of the sickness. Like, I think this is bleeding into our culture and causing all kinds of chaos. And I think what we see in Europe and in the States and all over the world, really, as Katherine said earlier, is my sort of drum that I keep beating, is a crisis of leadership. And that is due to a lack of masculinity. And we see it all over the place, don't we? And like true men won't take the leading roles anymore, because they're called bigots and racists and all kinds of nasty things if they start to differentiate between what's good and true and beautiful and what's bad and wrong. You're not allowed to do that anymore. How do we get ourselves out? I mean, the answer obviously is turn to Christ, isn't it? I know. That's
you just can't be afraid of what people are going to think, Mark. And we as Christians, and I will just beat up on the clergy as a member of the clergy, and I'm the most sinful of all of them, but I'll just say that up front. But we just cannot be afraid of offending the world.
You've got to stop saying that. This is another big bugbear of mine. It's this I'm the biggest sinner thing from the priest, right? If we're all on a journey of theosis, then you should be a bit of an exemplar.
Yeah, but
should be having a bit of an effect on you.
Yeah. In the divine liturgy, according to St. John Chrysostom in the holy services, the priest, before he receives the precious body and blood of Christ, he always asks the sexton and the server in the altar for forgiveness, and then the laity, and he recites in the prayers, he says, I'm first among sinners. And I would say that the clergy and I guess maybe the hierarchy really are, because we should know better, and we do know better, And to the extent that we succumb to any sinful thought or we give into whatever, then I think our accountability is higher. But putting that aside for a minute, what I wanted to say is that you simply can't worry about offending men or anybody if it offends Christ. You have to speak the truth. And what's the consequence? You're going to be crucified? Then you should say, glory be to God. It's our job. It's our job as men, Mark, and especially our job as clergy to take up our cross. And I would say that we've got a huge problem with the clergy not being masculine. That's really got to change first and foremost. The clergy should be the icon of Christ. For me, when I was young, I was kind of a wily, misguided young guy, and I met this tremendous, actually a Catholic priest. I may have mentioned to you before, Father Robert Spitzer. And to me, he was like the icon of Christ. He was fearless, brilliant man. I'd never seen anyone like that. Who was like, he was working for nothing. He had no pay. I was like, why is he doing all of that? So I had that archetype. I was able to see someone do it. Even before I sort of rediscovered my own faith, which is the Orthodox Church. God found a good reason for that to happen that way. So we have a huge responsibility because the priest really should be the icon of Christ. And I don't like seeing clergy that act effeminate at all. In any East, West, forget about it. I don't like clergy showing off how they got their tattoo and talking about all these gay, feminine things. Like, I just deplore that. I mean, completely. So I just think we've got to stop that. The clergy has to completely eject the effeminate, because we're not feminine, we're men. And to be very manly, whether we're celibate or married, doesn't make a difference. We have to be in the image of Christ. And you said something earlier, Mark, about My Big Fat Greek Wedding, which is sort of a cultural icon. And it's interesting you bring that up, that idea of the man being the head of the household, the woman being the neck, because, that movie, it was actually 3 parts. There was a sequel and there was a third part. And you can kind of watch in that movie, it kind of follows the contours of our society losing its mind. One, that saying about the woman controlling that, I'll tell you, in Greece, the women have very much so succumbed, up until this point, to the idea of a liberal ideology, which is why, sadly, Greece was one of the first, quote unquote, Orthodox countries to legalize same-sex marriage. Although there's nothing condoned about same-sex marriage in the Orthodox Church at all. The Church of Greece had nothing to do with that political movement. But Greece also has one of the lowest birth rates in the European Union and one of the highest rates of abortion, which is so shameful for an Orthodox country. And as you watch the woman who produced that series, and I actually had connected with her at one point, by the time you get to the second episode, all of a sudden the oldest son is gay and he has a partner, right? So it's becoming more liberal. And then by the time you get to the third installment, the wedding's not even a Christian wedding. It's an Islamic, quasi-Syrian production. And so, that show almost, it's interesting you brought it up. I've always say that we can use that as an icon of everything we shouldn't do coming out of an Orthodox country. Where, and by the way, My Big Fat Greek Wedding is not really a comedy. It's actually a tragic comedy. The woman had gotten kind of old. The daughter, at one point, the father says to her, you're getting kind of old. When are you going to get married? He obviously cannot accept a foreigner as a son-in-law. And, it's tragic. And that actually does happen in the Greek communities. And you do see the precipitous decline in birth rate. So, that is a country where I would say, I would hold it up, and I'm going to be very critical because I'm half Greek and grew up there, that what Greece has done as an Orthodox country by sort of liberating women, if you will, has not been a good experiment. It's not ended well. It's a country with 600 mosques, with a ridiculous political environment, and women who are barren. And so, and this is a country where on every corner you see the sort of the beauty and the richness and the fullness and the authority of the church. But even those people who have the benefit of that, when they turn their back on it, this is what you get. You get My Big Fat Greek Wedding, which just gets increasingly crazy as it goes along.
So wow, I'm very glad I never seen it. It's not a film normally if I watch something, it's because Mark Lambert said, Katherine, you've got to watch this.
Well, I wouldn't
with recommendations. And now I'm thinking, no, I don't want to watch that.
It's entertaining for Greeks because it covers their experience, as Greek Americans. They kind of relate to it. But what they don't do a good job of is pointing out where things are going terribly wrong, and they just sort of normalize it.
Yeah. I think that's the danger in the media, is the films that come out. It's not, people say, oh, you're puritanical. It's not a rule about not showing any sin in either literature or in movies. It's about what what do we do with that sin? If you're showing it by way of elevating it and celebrating it, that's problematic. But if you're revealing it to show, this is showing the depths that the human nature can plummet, the sort of human condition, this is, and you watch it or you read it and you don't want to be left there, that's good literature, that's good story, because you realize that you don't want to be in sin, you want to turn your back on sin. But I think unfortunately all too often we have literature and movies that celebrate it, and this is perversion, this is distortion. And just to go back briefly on your comments about the clergy, I think I think so much goes back to a misunderstanding of femininity and masculinity. So the sanctuary should always be masculine, and the church, we the lay people, are feminine before God. So we receive all that God gives, and the sanctuary, certainly in the Catholic Church in recent decades, this is one of the things that we grapple with over the new rite, as we call it, the Novus Ordo, is we see femininity creeping into the sanctuary under the guise of equality. And it's like, we can understand from a human level, you want to say women should be allowed to read and girls should be allowed to serve. But it's so much more significant than that I fear these is part of the very problem that prevents us from seeing our true femininity and masculinity. We should see the sanctuary as only masculine, and the lay congregation as feminine.
Well, I think that's true, to be certain. I mean, certainly the priesthood, the diaconate, the priesthood, the bishop, the office of bishop, is a masculine office because it emulates the icon of Christ. Again, when you insert the feminine, that's just not the ontological reality that God revealed himself in, full stop. You can want to change it, but that's not how God manifests himself in history. So it becomes absurd. But in the Orthodox thinking, in the sort of the early church, there's an idea of a royal priesthood, and that's the priesthood of the laity. And so this idea that, certainly the lay people who come before the holy altar, who come to church, they come before the sanctuary. Certainly there's men there. They're not feminine. They're the heads of households. They're the husbands, the fathers. And then their home becomes a sort of small church, Katherine. We say like ekklesiaki in Greek, like a small church, like a small ekklesia, the original Greek word. And in that home, they ought to have a prayer corner where the husband or the father leads the family like the priest. It's not an ordained priesthood, but it is a lay priesthood. We say a royal priesthood is what we say. So that idea of the priesthood, the holiness of leading the family, even if he's not in church, he brings his family before the icon in the evening before bed. They light a candle. They read their evening prayers together. They get up in the morning, say their morning prayers. He leads them in prayer before meals, makes the sign of the cross, teaches his children. When a young man or a young woman grows up and they see the father leading the family in this way, they're not going to go astray. There's not going to be problems in that family. It's not going to end in divorce. So long as the wife, her heart is open to Christ, there's not going to be rebellion from the children. They're not going to go crazy. And I've just never seen it. So that role, what he sees and participates in church, the sort of communion, the precious body and blood of Christ, the holy mysteries of the church, really needs to continue at home in the sort of small church at home. He needs to continue that, the husband and the father, even as a member of the laity.
Yeah, it's exactly the same in the Catholic Church, like that principle. So, and it is so important that you have a father. Who was it, Katherine, who was saying, we were talking to someone and they were saying, oh, I know, it was Anthony Abate, and he was saying that his father, so he had a wonderful father, but he wasn't a good priest in the family, in that family sense, and that caused a lot of the children to just lapse from the faith, unfortunately, because that element wasn't there. Father, I wanted to say, that's obviously a very pertinent observation about Greece. You could expand that to say all of Europe, couldn't you? Like, surely
Sure.
The same thing is the case all over Europe and here in the UK and probably
Almost
in the
all over
States.
Europe. Yeah.
So it's like the West, like Italy is another example. All the things you said you could apply to Italy, and despite the fact, one of the things that really bothers me, we've just had Archbishop Charles Scicluna, who's the Archbishop of Malta, and under Pope Benedict XVI, you know, we thought that Scicluna was the man. He did his doctoral thesis under Cardinal Burke. You know, we thought he was super Orthodox. He keeps going on about homosexuality, and he's just released a pastoral letter that's, you know, utterly vacuous. And you just have to think, what is this obsession with homosexuality? And Malta is a place where Katherine and I have both been, and obviously it's ostensibly it's very Catholic. You know, you walk around, as you say, church, like beautiful churches everywhere. There's all the little shrines and icons, and everything's named after Our Lady and, you know, the saints and one thing another. So my question is, all these places in Europe that have been so soaked for all these years in their Christian heritage, why have they abandoned the faith so badly? And what do we do to get it back?
Well, my observation, Mark, has been that you can bifurcate Europe. Western Europe has seen quite a substantial decline in observation of its faith. I point out Greece, and I'm hard on Greece because I am part Greek. I'm half Greek. But I don't think you could say the same thing of Romania or Bulgaria or Albania or Russia or Ukraine. In Romania, they just opened the National Cathedral. It's extraordinary. Homosexuality is illegal in Russia. So we have to kind of bifurcate between like Eastern Christianity and Western Christianity. You know, going back to the point of Greece for just a moment, which of course is such an ancient church, you know, the devil really works there. And you find extremes. I mean, you find tremendous holiness in Greece. You find Mount Athos, right? It's one of the most ancient and holiest places in all of Christendom. And I don't think for a second the Church of Greece endorses in any way what the politicians, you know, inserted, the immorality the politicians inserted into the culture, and the people, you know, seem to follow, some of the people at least. I've spent a lot of time in Italy, so I know what you're talking about, with seeing all the shrines and the edifices to their fidelity to Christ. It's everywhere from the past. But if you go into a church in Italy today on a major feast day like Epiphany or something, I was recently in a Catholic church on Epiphany, and I don't think of the 20 or so people in there, I don't think a single one was under the age of 75. And I said, where are the young people? Like when you go some other countries, I spent a lot of time in Switzerland, for example. Their churches are beautiful in Switzerland. You know, Switzerland has two state-sanctioned religions, Protestants and Catholics. Their churches are like museums. They're immaculate, but they're just that. They're museums. There's not a living faith. There's no blood pulsing through the veins. So we do see a lot of immigrants from Eastern Europe, Orthodox countries, slowly taking over those churches and using them. And Switzerland's a truly interesting country because it sort of straddles East and Western Europe, right? And it's got this sort of confluence of Catholic and Protestant faith, but then you've got this third faith, the Orthodox, which are not really spoken about, and you've got all these Russians and Ukrainians there who are quite wealthy, so they leave Russia, or heaven forbid, the war-torn Ukraine, and they take hold there, and they're sort of using these churches and reinvigorate. And the Swiss, interestingly enough, they don't really mind it, even though Orthodoxy is not a sanctioned religion by the state, because they know that with the Muslim influence, like the UK and in France, you know, they're smart enough not to let mosques be built in Switzerland, but they know that if they lose their religious identity, their Christian identity, let's say, forget East or West for a minute, once you give up your faith, which may have happened in France or the UK, I don't know, I tend to think that was the beginning. It's not really the immigrants' fault. It's not the Muslim population's fault. Europe went in 25 years from 500,000 Muslim immigrants to 50 million. People are quick to point the finger at the politicians and at the immigrant population. But I would just submit, if you do not love your church, if you are out for a jog Sunday morning or going to the beach and you're not in church, don't be surprised if you lose your geography eventually. You're going to lose your faith. They're going to lose your cultural identity, and they're going to give up your geography. So the Muslims show up and they're like, oh, you don't have a God? We'll give you a God. His name's Muhammad. And I see it in the young Italians. I talk to young Italians. I'm like, they're like, I talked to this young woman the other day. She said, I'm going to go to Japan. I said, really? So that's the most homogenous society in the world. They will never accept you. She said, I hate it here. I said, why? Oh, I can't stand it. I'm thinking, how misguided? Like, who put that in your mind? Such a great society. Look at the love of beauty in Italy. You mentioned Malta. Look at the beauty. Dante. I mean, look at what they built. I mean, look at their history. This magnificent culture, and somehow this young generation has been taught to think that they
Hate
have
it.
to disdain their own heritage. And then in
Yeah.
Switzerland, you move to Switzerland, people they're talking about like, oh, we adopt all these children from India, and we go to our yoga classes, and we do our Eastern religion, Buddhism thing. I was saying, really? You're into Eastern mysticism?
But isn't that because we've been
Mysticism.
taught, and our children have
Crickets.
been taught?
Like, where was the program?
But
Yeah.
our children have been taught that it's
Sorry, Mark, go ahead.
it's progressive, and it's it's open-minded, and it's like, intelligent to experience new cultures, and to not be insulated, to not be insular. It's funny, this morning I was out for a walk, and I walked past the War Memorial in Southend where I live, and out in front of the War Memorial it says "Lest we forget." And I had a long chat with one of my sons yesterday about the war. He was talking to me about the war and saying, why did we fight the Second World War? And it's, well, to preserve our culture, to preserve our... Well, we've forgotten, haven't we? We've forgotten. Like, we don't... Because our kids don't want to be British anymore. They don't see that as something beneficial.
We were sold a lie. And then the end of history, Fukuyama established the United Nations. Boom, this is what you've got. And I couldn't agree with Father Lemelson more. Yeah, we can moan about Muslims all we want, but I'm fed up of this. I'm fed up of the moaning and the political parties and the machinations and the arguments and the what are we going to do? Go to church, switch off, go to church and recover your faith, because otherwise we don't deserve our heritage if we're just going to have it as window dressing, if we're not living it.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
From a first-hand experience with Muslims, that I know, that's exactly what you said, Father. That's exactly how they think. They think you've got no framework to push back on. There's no ideology. They're coming into a vacuum, and what they see is like a lack of morality. And so, yeah, of course, their civilization
and honestly is a lack of morality, frankly. Yeah. But I spent a lot of time in Lugano, where I reestablished a Greek Orthodox church in southern Switzerland. And it's fascinating. You walk on the sidewalk. Lugano is a beautiful city, right? It's like an idealized version of Italy. And you'll see Swiss walking with a stroller. You're like, oh, look, a young Swiss family with a kid. And you look in the stroller, it's a dog, like every time. And then you see a Muslim family. And of course, they're wearing their burqas and stuff. And they kind of cheat the system, because in Switzerland, they can't cover their face. So they put on COVID masks. Like nobody's going to figure it out. But to their credit.
But no one does.
There's a child. Yeah, but there's a child in that stroller every time.
Yeah.
So it's literally, it's fascinating, but they've killed off their own genea, their own generation, as we say in Greek, their own lineage, their own DNA. It's like, what does it mean to be Swiss anymore? Nobody knows. The Switzerland, again, fascinating country, because the population has grown faster than any other European country. Has grown 30% in the last 20, 25 years. But you can't identify what a Swiss person is anymore. Nobody knows. Like, Switzerland's like an idea. I'm afraid the UK and France are just an idea as well. Like, what does it stand for? And I really have said for years, it's all comes down to your faith. If you're not, you go out on a Sunday morning, everyone's out on a jog, taking care of their body. Yeah. What about your spiritual life? What about your life in Christ? They have no idea. So, but you touched on a point earlier, Mark, where you talked about memory. And I think that's hugely important. We've done a lot of podcast episodes on this. The father leading the family must remember Christ, even Christ's own words, do this in remembrance of me. We're living in a society that wants to live in the future, that wants to pull the future into the present. If you look at some of these disturbing forces in the world, these tech oligarchs like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk, they are almost I shouldn't say almost antichrist. I mean, he wears an antichrist suit, Elon Musk. This is the opposite of what Christ is saying, which is saying, look back into the past and bring it into the present. So if we cannot remember where we come from, to your point, Katherine, we surrender it completely. And, there's a very prominent commentator, Eva Velinderbroek, the Dutch young woman, who, I don't want to be too hard on her, but, like once she became quite prominent, she got married very quickly and had a child. And that's very good. That's wonderful. Glory be to God. But she was sort of the poster child actually for a liberal woman until that point. But she's very aggressive, attacking politicians and the system and all, as if she was going to church every Sunday, and her family, and like they love their church and they're contributing to it. Like I've always said, like the Muslim immigrant population would just be like tourists if you did that. Like it would not be a threat. They wouldn't really be able to take hold you look at the piazzas and we say in Greek, the platias, the center of every town in Europe, the geography is quite different than America. It's like shotgun shot. We're just scattered everywhere. But in Europe, it's centered around the center of the town. And every time the church is there. Like, just look at the architecture and the geography, how it works. So that is the heartbeat of the community. the life in Christ, the koinonia we say in Greek, the community. That's where the word communion comes from, Holy Communion. Like when you lose that, you lose your social fabric completely. The religion and the culture are inseparable. So when they start becoming obsessed with Hindu yoga practices and they have gold Buddhas all over their apartments, and I say, well, should you be surprised? Should you be surprised when you, like I say, the Muslims show up and like, oh great, don't worry, we got a God too, you know?
Absolutely.
We'll show you.
That's very true.
Very well said. To bring it back to the beginning, we started off by talking about the crisis in masculinity, Fuentes, Tate, Cavicula, have I got that right? And I suppose the question is, what are they offering? Because you spoke about these Swiss women walking around with dogs in buggies, and the Muslims walking around with babies in buggies, and this is just the stark reality, guys. You don't have families, you don't build a nation on your own. You build a nation is a group of families
right.
formed under, you know, a woman under her husband under God. And if we've lost that, and yet Tate and Fuentes and other figures aren't offering anything, what are they really offering? They're not offering anything sustainable.
They're totally impotent. There's no evidence that Andrew Tate has any actual children. Cavicular is literally infertile from his practices. His narcissism has gone so extreme that he's made himself infertile. And Nick Fuentes, of course, as you know, is an incel, an involuntary celibate. There's nothing manly about any three of those caricatures, in my opinion. A real man takes for himself a wife, and he serves her, he protects her, and God willing, she'll give him children. Then he really starts to become a man. When he raises up children. If he doesn't have physical children, then he'll be a spiritual father. There's many ways to be a father. There's many ways to be a mother. But until you do that, you're stuck in the high school mentality. They look like a bunch of high school kids running around, even though they're in their 30s. You know, Nick Fuentes, I guess, a little bit younger, but it's like you said earlier, Mark, it's the reluctance and the resistance to growing up and being a real man.
Definitely.
So they're not offering anything to say, as a short answer, Katherine. What they're doing is they're enriching themselves. There's a great deal of, you know, it's really a lot of decadence as well. They live lives of luxury, like Andrew Tate, for example. And I think that when a man lives in a life of luxury, he starts to become less masculine and eventually becomes feminine. And again, I keep using this example of Switzerland because I spent so much time there. But you see it where these women, when they do have children, they'll have like one child, and like a lot of these Swiss women would say, you know, I've got one child and that's enough. They would always say it like that's enough afterwards, as if it was a curse instead of a blessing. And because they all use the same line, I'm like, do they go to like some kind of convention where they learn these lines? But like my kids were educated in Switzerland, and they went to this school. It was called Tassis in southern Switzerland. And ultimately, I wrote some very public letters to the board of directors, but they had inserted into their religious studies program, believe it or not, a Chinese communist curriculum. And as I looked at the school and I sort of took a step back, I noticed it was a matriarchy. And when the matriarchy becomes very strong, the men become ancillary. They become very feminine and passive. And they were consistently infertile. There was no children involved, like the head of that school. And it was a very common thing. And so, you know, this indoctrination, this framework starts very early. And then the school had gone totally off the rails because they began to insert pornography into the curriculum. Quite frankly, it wasn't just a sex education curriculum. That was really just opening the door for something much darker and nefarious. So, you know, we had some great public letters online. We published online, and the very, very arrogant and proud board of directors. You talked about pride earlier, Katherine, but I just thought, I don't really care what they think or what they do. I'm just going to call it the way I see it. And, you know, in the ensuing years, many parents reached out and said, you know, we read those letters and they really meant a lot. And it gave them the courage. So when we take the courage to do the right thing, we do it prayerfully, right? Not out of arrogance or out of pride. Hopefully we do it with a true sense of doing God's will. You know, it's contagious. It helps others. When a young man sees a man act like a man, he's, oh, okay, that's how it's done. They have to see. So it's really important for us as men. We can't really do it for the women because we're men. The women have to do it for the women. But, you know, we really just have to do our part, which is faithfulness, humility, life in Christ, lead the family. And leading doesn't mean, you know, pushing your wife down. It means serving her. If there's anything you're going to fight over in the marriage, it should be who's going to serve who. And if that takes place, you know, you're not going to see fights that end in divorce. So, you know, but it's shocking when you look at the culture at large. You say, how did we fall so far? It just blows my mind that young people have no concept. And then, yes, these guys, Andrew Tate and Cavicular, they enter the picture and they're monetizing it, Katherine.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to. It comes down to money, frankly. The love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, as has been said.
Yeah, goodness. Well, to end, can we turn to a statistic you shared in that video? 63% of men under 30 are single. Now, I think this is really significant. There are many people watching, perhaps, who might say, so what? Under 30, sow your wild oats, enjoy your 20s. You've got plenty of time yet. I think this is a relatively new idea that you wait until you're 30-something, start your career. We should be really marrying younger than the culture tells us, shouldn't we? Can you tell us why that's important?
Well, if you wait till you're older, you're in two separate worlds, first of all, and you're more likely to engage in fornication as time goes by. The ideal, I'll tell you a little bit about my story. I don't want to bore you to death, but when I met my wife, she was 17, I was 23. And her name's Theodora, which means gift from God. She was truly a gift from God. When I saw her in the church for the first time, I'd spent my years in the seminary praying fervently. I actually wanted to be a monastic. I always thought about going to the monastery, being a celibate. And I was kind of negotiating with God. And I was saying, well, if you don't want me to be a monastic, if you want to be like a married priest, then you should probably bring your wife, because I don't want to go anywhere else other than church. I want to go to church. I want to go to work. That's all I want to do, class. Anyways, I spent months praying like this very fervently. And one day I was in the church and I see my wife and she's standing there. And I think she's the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen in my life, like an angel. So I go into the altar and I get on my knees. And I'm not saying in front of the altar because I was a layman still. I was just a seminarian. But I went in front of the table of preparation, the diakonikon, we say in Greek. And I said, God, if you let me marry that woman, I promise you I will always take care of her. And then I went and I spoke to her. And, first thing I told her, I said, this is a true story. I said, you and I, we're going to get married. We're going to have beautiful kids one day. And she's like, I don't even know you. What are you, a stalker or something? She's thinking but true story. Like now we look back, now I'm an old man, right? But I look back on those memories and we talk about going to the beach in the summers and going, skin diving. I'm a big fan of skin diving. We talk about all these memories we shared together since we were really just kids. And that's what it means for the two to become one. That's what they say in the prayers of holy matrimony. The two shall become one. If you meet in your 30s or 40s and you're already in your career and you've got your friends and your experiences and 17 other girlfriends, how are you going to become imprinted on your wife?
Yeah.
And then the wife, she's what? She's going to work at Meta and Mark Zuckerberg's going to finance her freezing her eggs so she can get pregnant when she's 48. And then she's going to be terribly miserable and lonely and can't figure out why she can't get married. This is it's an attack on the holiness of the family. Look, a good wife or a good husband is a gift from God. The only thing you can do is pray that you will be found worthy of the crowns of marriage, because it is an achievement. That's why in the Orthodox Church we still wear crowns, like the athletes. They get over the finish line. It's a gift from God. If we go out in the world, she has to be a brunette, she has to be this height, she doesn't, she's not my type. What are you talking about? Like, you got all the wrong language. The language is, Lord, find me worthy of holy matrimony. Find me worthy of this blessedness. If I stay single for too long, especially as a man, I'm probably going to fall into sin, and more than once. So yeah, this idea that I'm going to establish my career, I'll spend 9 years in higher education, and I got to climb the corporate ladder till I have a certain number of zeros in my bank account is total nonsense. The excuse of these young men, this 60s, I can't afford a family. Really? Go to Africa. Go to the poor countries in Africa. What do you mean you can't afford a family? Give me a break. If you're honest and you work hard, you think you can't put, milk and bread on the table? Will you be wealthy? Probably not. Maybe you will. I don't know. Does it matter? No. Is wealth going to help you out? No. Is it going to help your kids out? Absolutely not. So what are you looking for? You've got to get back to this sort of what God intended. The idea of marrying late in your life, you're in two separate worlds, like those marriages are strained. They're absolutely strained. They're absolutely strained. So I agree with you, Katherine, 1,000%. Speaking from my own experience, that get married when you're young.
Well said.
Anyways, I'm not Gen X. I'm not Gen Z. I always tell my kids I'm Gen Dinosaur. So we got to recover something from that image.
Yeah. I think that's a wonderful note to end on. I completely agree. I think we have to start challenging this idea that you leave home to go to university to be indoctrinated a bit more, just like you were through school, and you pay for the privilege and you're enslaved by debt. There is a different way. And thank you for sharing your story and explaining it so beautifully. Why would anyone want something different? So we do need to recover that sense for our young people. But Father, I hope you'll join us again another time, because there are so many topics we have on our list. We met before and spoke together, and we've only touched the surface. So perhaps you'll come back and we'll dive a bit deeper.
I'd like that very much, Katherine. It's such a privilege to join you. Thank you for thinking of me. I totally enjoyed our conversation. I hope we can do it again sometime.
Excellent. Perhaps our audience will write in the comments if they've got any questions for Father Lemelson, and we can deal with them when we come, on our next meeting.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Wonderful. Right, for now, thank you all for watching. Do visit our website, catholicunscripted.com, and check out the links below where you can see more about Father Lemelson. And I want to say Father Emmanuel. I'm stumbling over Lemelson. Can I say that?
Yeah, we always use the first names, actually, the Christian names, than the first names. So yeah, Father Emmanuel is usually I'm referred to.
It's easier for me. Okay, where you can find out more about Father Emmanuel and his work. But for now, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.